Well, unless you've not been reading the news, you would have seen that there's been a huge hit job against Corbyn, against anyone who stands up for the rights of Palestinians, for the rights of Muslims, and it's been strangled and weaponised to state that you're anti-Semitic, which is really problematic on so many levels, because as a Jew, the last thing that you should be is racist towards anyone else, considering our history. Unfortunately, a lot of people have bought into that because the media propaganda has been so strong that people have been fighting each other and saying, you're anti-Semitic, when people are just standing up for human rights for everyone. And it's been weaponised to crack down on people who want to stand up for Palestinian rights and for Palestinian freedom. All four of my grandparents were Nazi Holocaust survivors, 2 from Germany, 2 from Poland. And from the very young age, the most formative imprint in my mind was the concept of never again ever. When I used to hear their stories, often war survivors tell their stories to their grandchildren before their children because they try and protect their children. So I heard a lot of my grandparents' survival stories before anyone else did, and as a 12-year-old, when you just want to watch Grange Hill, these things get stuck in your head. And for me, you know, never again ever for anyone. This is also, you know, you've got to challenge what's called a Holocaust hierarchy about whose story gets told in terms of what happened in the war. You know, as a queer Jew, I'm equally queer as I am Jewish, yet all I heard about as a kid was what happened to the Jews, and I've had to find out for myself what happened to everyone else. So the point is, their story has been so formative for me, and I've got a lot of Zionists in my biological family, and I understand the conditioning of apartheid Israel is so strong. I went on Israel tour when I was 16, when you're shown around and being like, look at what your grandparents survived for. Look, it's hot, it's got palm trees, it's better than Barnet and Southgate. And it's very easy to believe. And then you realise there's a huge other story to be told. BDS stands for Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions. And in this context, it's boycotting Israeli apartheid, asking governments and any governmental system to divest their economic values, their economic goods, divest their full support, practical, financial, emotional support for apartheid Israel, for governments to place sanctions on the Israeli government until they uphold the International Human Rights Charter. So it's a specific 3-pronged strategy to confront oppression. The Israeli government take the BDS movement extremely seriously because it's a very effective tool to challenge the apartheid regime. As we can see in developments across Europe, across the world, like for the example with Rias in Germany, where they conflate anti-Semitism with standing up for human rights. Like what we talked about in the film, when if anyone seemed to be even mentioning BDS, mentioning Palestine, that seemed to automatically be anti-Semitic, which is outrageous. Because by standing up for Palestine, you're standing up for human rights, you're standing up against racism, which is exactly what the Jewish people, the Jewish community should be about. Today I'm investigating this really interesting organisation called Rias. Rias is the organisation in Germany whose remit is collecting data on incidents associated with anti-Semitism. They had recorded 1,083 anti-Semitic incidents in Berlin in 2018. Now that's a 14% rise than the previous year. That's huge. They go on to say, and this is where it becomes particularly poignant, incidents attributable to anti-Israel activism are the second largest classifiable group. For anti-Israel activism, Rias Berlin includes, for example, secular Palestinian groups and activists who support anti-Semitic boycott campaigns against the Jewish state of Israel. So essentially, they are equating challenging or critiquing the state of Israel with anti-Semitism, which has huge repercussions. If we deducted the 101 incidents related to anti-Israel activism, the total number of anti-Semitic incidents in Berlin would come to 982 in 2018. Whilst this is still a 4% increase from the previous year, it's far from the figures reported by Rias. We contacted Rias numerous times, but they refused and seemed anxious to talk to us, so I decided to call them up directly.
Bennett?
Hello, is this Rias?
Yes, you are talking to Rias, yes.
I'm from London, but I'm in Berlin, and I'm in a cafe, and I overheard the people at the table next to me talking about Palestine and the Boycott Israel movement, the BDS movement. Is that an anti-Semitic incident?
We consider the public call for boycotting Israel as an anti-Semitic statement. I mean, if you could hear it very well,
Yeah.
then it is something that we have to consider to be like a public talk. Reporting to us is definitely something we will consider and examine very well.
Thank you. You have a good day. I'll do that as soon as possible. Wow. And like we saw with the interview with Thomas Sandell in European Parliament, you know, it just takes a bit of questioning to unpack the difference between the boycott of Israel, the systematic apartheid and oppression that's going on, with the boycott of Jewish goods, which are very different things. Because obviously boycotting Jews is a massive generalisation and also racist, but boycotting a government, boycotting a state is not racist. Well, this is the European Parliament. I guess this is where the magic happens, eh? Thomas Sandell is the director of the European Coalition for Israel, a Judeo-Christian lobby that works to deepen relations between Europe and Israel.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Really
Nice to meet
appreciate
you.
your time.
Well,
name's
my
Dan.
pleasure.
When I hear people in Europe say, don't buy from the Jews, kauf nicht von Juden, that rings a bell. I heard that before.
But what does BDS say? Does BDS say don't buy Israeli products or don't buy products from Jews? Big difference.
They say, let's boycott goods from the only Jewish state in the world today. It has a name, Israel.
Is it boycotting Israeli products? Does it say that? Or does it say we boycott Jewish people's products?
I'm sure if they're smart enough and they have the money and they have the funds and they have the PR people to be able to phrase things in a way that they can get away with it.
You can't tell me what it says. What the B...
Of course, Israel.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very different, and it's good to get that clarity.
Yeah.
When people say that I'm the wrong kind of Jew, they obviously don't know their Jewish values, because the Jewish value of Tikkun Olam, which I learn every week in Hebrew school when I was a kid, means heal the world, means love and compassion and justice for everyone on the planet. So they've got it completely wrong. They don't know what they're talking about, and they can say that all they like. When you stand by the principles of Tikkun Olam, that'll take you far and beyond the pathetic comments by people who just want to maintain a colonial regime. So as a Jew, as a grandchild of 4 Nazi Holocaust survivors, as someone who is a product of migration, who's a product of oppression, you have to stand up for the fundamental human rights for everyone. And the last thing I'm ever going to let happen is my grandparents' story and what they went through be weaponized to oppress other people. None of us are free until Palestine is free. And what they went through, what everyone went through in the Nazi Holocaust, our story can never be laid to rest until Palestine is free. Please support the Canary. It's really important in this day and age to stand up for independent media, to stand up for voices outside the mainstream, to stand up for media which gives a platform for freedom struggles across the world.